everyone. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking again to my former colleague and one of the most talented lawyers in America, certainly one of the bravest, Jenin Younes, Litigation Counsel for the new Civil Liberties Alliance. Welcome, Jenin.
Thank you so much for having me, Naomi.
Yeah. Jenin, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. Jenin Younes was my former colleague and a great writer at the American Institute of Economic Research and a wonderful blogger. She's known as Lefty Lockdowns because she, like me, is from the left, but a little bit lonely as we fight for freedom when it comes to our own people. I won't put words in your mouth. And she's been doing extraordinary work along with her colleagues at the NCLA with litigating on behalf of American constitutional rights. And you had a big win, Jenin. Tell us about it.
Oh, thank you so much. So I represented a professor, Todd Zywicki, at George Mason University in Arlington, Virginia. Professor Zywicki did not want to get the vaccine in large part because he had natural immunity. He had quite a bad case of COVID in March 2020 and very high levels of antibodies. Actually, I believe it's 900 times the baseline. So like really, really high. There was no need for him to get the vaccine, but GMU came down with this mandate saying that everybody had to get it unless they had a medical or religious exemption, were able to obtain one. So Professor Zywicki submitted that this getting the vaccine was medically unnecessary and actually created a risk of harm because if you've had COVID, and especially if you have antibody levels that high, the vaccine is more likely to result in adverse consequences. Wow. So we had medical affidavits from his doctor and immunologist, Dr. Human Nurchazem, and then we also had a declaration from Drs. Bhattacharya and Kuldorf, who are two of the epidemiologists who were co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. So they supported his position, and we argued that because Professor Zywicki was naturally immune, GMU simply had no compelling interest at all in forcing him to be vaccinated. It's also important to note that GMU is a state university, so it has to follow constitutional strictures. These arguments would not necessarily apply to a private university.
Got it.
So the university, we filed the lawsuit. They made clear that they were not granting an exemption based on natural immunity. In fact, their lawyers said to me, natural immunity doesn't exist. And my jaw sort of dropped open and I was like, you can't be serious. And they're like, no, that's GMU's position. There's no such thing as natural immunity, which is just completely unscientific. This is 1984 level propaganda, frankly. It's really, really disturbing. But the school ultimately granted him a medical exemption on different grounds, which were quite flimsy, to be frank. And we think the lawsuit was the real reason that they caved.
And so this is the beauty of lawyers and litigation. It's we're in a time where pressure has to be put on these institutions. They can't have immunity. They have to be more scared of going along with tyrannical, unconstitutional mandates than not. And that's where you and your colleagues are so valuable. So did your lawsuit set a precedent for other lawyers? Is it valuable for other people who are not knowing what to do with state-funded universities that are issuing coercive vaccine mandates for employees and students?
Yeah, so I think, it can serve as a template. I mean, our arguments are, we made a number of constitutional arguments. We also made an argument about the emergency use authorization statute. Notably, it looks like the Pfizer vaccine is going to be fully approved on Monday. So that argument is not as strong, although two of the vaccines that are widely available are still only emergency use authorization. So the argument isn't entirely gone. It's just a bit weaker. But yeah, I hope that it serves to help other people in similar positions. And I can say I'm not done. Stay tuned.
Does that mean you're going to appeal, or what does it mean that you're not done?
I think Professor Zywicki is satisfied with the outcome of his case. So we've decided to, this is a resolution that satisfies all of the parties. But there are many other people in the country facing similar situations. Let's put it that way. So
Gotcha. Gotcha. And are you at liberty to talk about any of the other lawsuits that the new Civil Liberties Alliance is pursuing, or are those still top secret?
They're top secret, but come back to me in 2 weeks.
Fantastic. I'm so happy that we have powerful, eloquent litigators, lawyers like you and your colleague, whom I've also met, Mr. Mark Chenoweth. I'm sure all of the team at NCLA is equally talented. Let's go to what other, I mean, I get emails every single day. I'm sure you get thousands of emails from desperate parents, desperate state employees, desperate federal employees, desperate military, right, who are having their medical rights and their rights to privacy stripped by these vaccine mandates. What's your best advice for people watching this who, might not be lucky enough to have you for a lawyer, even to have money for a lawyer? What can they do? Can anyone go to their doctor and get a medical exemption, for instance, if there's a mandate at by their employer?
I think nearly every mandate I've heard of has religious and medical exemptions. I think if they didn't, that would be a problem in and of itself, that you would be able to challenge. So the degree to, or the strictness to with which these exemptions are being granted or denied, it varies from institution to institution. So I know some are granting them pretty liberally. I think they basically just want to get rid of anybody who doesn't want to get the vaccine. So it's more like the vaccine is more of a suggestion, and if you just come up with something, but others are being quite harsh and are denying them. I mean, absent, a lot of documentation. For instance, I'm looking at Michigan State University, which has quite a harsh mandate. They actually, even if you work remotely, you're subject to their mandate, which is quite insane. And the religious and medical exemption forms I've looked at are they only allow medical exemptions in 4 specific circumstances, and your doctor has to sign on. You have to provide documentation, and the religious ones likewise. I think they're worried people are just going to go in and say, "Oh, my religion doesn't allow me to get the vaccine," so they require documented proof you've been a part of the religion for a while. They want attestations from leaders in the religion that your religious beliefs don't allow you to get the vaccine. So they're really trying to make this very, very strict, and I think they're going to very conservatively allow for exemptions.
When you say they, do you mean Michigan State or other universities?
Michigan State, yeah.
Michigan State.
So
Good God, that's so un-American. I mean, having to prove anything about your religion, isn't that a violation of the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy? I mean, when I look at these mandates, and I'm not a lawyer, which is one reason I adore talking to you, I'm baffled at how every single one of these mandates doesn't violate HIPAA law, the Nuremberg Code, and the Equality Act, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act, because as I understand it, it's completely illegal. If an employer can't ask me if I'm pregnant or if I'm planning to get pregnant, how can an employer ask me to take an experimental procedure, or even one that after Monday will be approved? How is that not against multiple laws already?
I mean, I think it is, and I think it's a violation of certain constitutional principles, like the right to decline medical treatment, and the right to bodily autonomy, which are the Supreme Court has recognized are embodied in various amendments like the 9th and the 14th. But the mood in the country is such today that it just doesn't really matter. Judges are really worried, in my opinion, about being responsible for people dying of the coronavirus, and our rights have really taken a hit here. I mean, what's happening in New York is insane. You basically can't go to any indoor space anymore without proof that you've been vaccinated. I don't know that there's ever been anything in history like this, and I'm certainly not, in modern history of this country. And people say things like, well, you don't necessarily have the right to go to a particular restaurant or bar. You don't have the right to go to Harrigan's or Doyle's or whatever. Well, that's true, but this is an unprecedented situation where we're sort of wholesale shutting people out of society based on whether or not they got a vaccine. And I don't understand why people don't think this is scary. I mean, why not have everybody show their criminal history every time they go to an indoor space? You know, maybe you're violent, maybe we should let you. This is not how a civil, contemporary Western society behaves.
No, absolutely right. And I mean, there were restrictions such as these in the not too distant past in our country, and they were Jim Crow laws.
Right.
You know, there used to be green books, and they're very, and we need a green book now, right, for New York or New York State or California. And that's what African-American travelers used to have to use so that they could eat when they were traveling, walk into a restaurant that would allow them to sit down. So, you know, very similar situation. These were private businesses, and some of them discriminated and others didn't. And Jim Crow laws, you know, allowed these kinds of creations of a two-tier society. And then that was ruled unconstitutional, right? With
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, one of the ironies here is actually in a place like New York City, the majority of unvaccinated people are actually Black people. And there are historical reasons for that. A lot of Black people are, understandably suspicious of the government. They're worried, you know, the Tuskegee experiments. So they're suspicious of this. They don't want to get the vaccine. Also, a lot of minorities had COVID, and that's another reason they don't want the vaccine. They tend to be lower income. They were, you know, more the people who were cooking your takeout, bringing your Pelotons, you know, serving delivery. So they got COVID because they weren't sitting at home on Zoom. And now they don't want, and now they're being shut out of New York City and life in New York City as we know it. And this is going to hurt, you know, Black-owned businesses and in, you know, predominantly Black neighborhoods. And for the left to not see this, I'm done holding back. Like, they're just hypocrites.
They're just hypocrites. I can't. You've anticipated my next question, Jenin. You're absolutely right about the hit that is disproportionately affecting people of color. In the lockdowns, 40% of businesses that died were Black-owned businesses, and that generations, or at least one generation of hard-earned, hard-fought capital that now can't be passed on to the next generation. And that inability to, you know, that way that systemic racism keeps African-American families from accruing wealth from one generation to the next. Well, this was a giant, you know, blow of systemic racism against Black-owned businesses. And as you rightly point out, you know, people of color have disproportionately had COVID and have natural immunities, and there's a hideous history of experimentation on African Americans, sterilization of African Americans, you know, men and women. And you're absolutely right. So let's talk about the left, you know, and I think this is a place to not hold back if you're, you know, if you're comfortable doing that as a lawyer. What is going on? I mean, you and I come from a tribe that prides itself on freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, my body, my choice, anti-racism, and, you know, the Constitution. And now suddenly, as of November, really, it's the left, it's all our friends and our people at least I voted for, who are gleefully joining up in a two-tier society in which people are being discriminated against on the basis of their bodies, and a society that celebrates censorship and illegal suppression of liberties everywhere. What are your thoughts about that? What's going on?
Well, just quick note, the only point on which I'll disagree with you is I think this actually goes back to March of 2020, not November of 2020.
All right. Let's talk.
But I mean, it's not the vaccine mandates and the approach to lockdowns and masks weren't exactly the same thing. But I think it's the left has just become very authoritarian. There's this authoritarian streak, this desire to control other people. I don't know, you know, I do think like the Donald Trump syndrome, what do they call it? Trump derangement syndrome played a role where Trump sort of early on was equivocal. He like didn't seem to take the virus that seriously, even though he stopped international travel. He thought masks were stupid, which they are. So the left hates Donald Trump so much that alone was enough for them to say, you know what, masks must be great, lockdowns must be great, we've got to shut schools down, we've got to shut businesses down. And I think they sort of dug their heels in. I think that's part of it. But I also think that I think there's been an authoritarianism taking over the left. I actually experienced some of that myself over I would say the past, like, I want to say 5 to 7 years, I disagreed strongly with a lot of my cohort on the left about free speech issues and whether we should listen to people we disagree with, or we should just shut them up and call them racists and Nazis and send them away, lock them up or whatever. I always thought we should hear ideas we find unpleasant. That's how civil societies operate. That's how they advance. That's how people develop. You don't develop as a human by shutting yourself off from ideas that you find unpleasant or offensive or anything. So I had disagreed with them on that, and I was actually treated quite harshly for some of my views in that area for years. So I had some friction with the left, and then I really broke from them with the COVID reaction. So I think it's a combination of an authoritarian streak taking over the left, and then the Trump thing, and I don't know, and some bizarre notions of health and safety gone awry.
Yeah, really. Well, let me ask you one more question, if I may. Well, two more questions. In all of your work and in your communication with the great signatories of the Great Barrington Declaration, Dr. Kuldorf, Dr. Bhattacharya, their colleague is Dr. Snehatra Gupta, all the distinguished epidemiologists I've heard from, and also the manufacturers of the vaccines themselves, they don't claim that vaccinated people are safer to be around than unvaccinated people, right? The vaccines don't affect infection. They don't keep you from getting infected. They affect the severity of your symptoms. This is the claim from every primary source that I've seen, the manufacturers and so on. And yet the whole kind of nexus of discrimination rolled out in these vaccine mandates at universities, in places where people assemble, is predicated on the belief or the notion that unvaccinated people are a greater threat to others than vaccinated people. Do you address this in your lawsuits? Is your understanding the same as mine?
Yes, it's actually in Bhattacharya and Kuldorf's declaration. They address that. It really doesn't make any sense for that reason. There's a logical gap going on, and I think what's happening is people have this idea that if everybody just got the vaccine, the coronavirus would go away. It's not true. No serious epidemiologist thinks that. But I think people want to think there's a simple answer, and they've been looking, we've been blaming a group of people all along for this. It tends to be the same people, but first it was the people who didn't want to socially distance. That was, spring of 2020. And then summer of 2020 was the people who resisted mask wearing. And now it's the people who don't want the vaccine. It's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. And I think, this is really problematic. We've seen this historically, and in my opinion, it's a craven political ploy by the Democrats and people like Fauci, who's ultimately just a politician, to shift blame onto a group of people. And this is really scary. I mean, this is the stuff of historical atrocities, and the hatred with which, progressive left treats unvaccinated people. I mean, I've been at parties hearing things I could not believe what I was hearing. It's scary to me that people don't recognize the historical patterns. These things never look exactly the same twice. That's how it happens again.
Right.
So if you're smart, you should be looking for the underlying mindset, not exactly the same manifestation.
Absolutely. I mean, I still get painful emails from friends who will only meet me socially distanced and outside. And it's as if they don't understand basic epidemiology. They're no safer to be around than I am. And it's just a strangely stigmatizing mindset. You're absolutely right, with terrible historical.
And if they have the vaccine, why should they care? But it's so obvious that it doesn't make sense, that it's beyond, it's just so clear that this is about scapegoating people.
Right. But I don't think in the case of friends and loved ones that I'm thinking of, they actually or actively think that they've suspended or that they're being mean. It's almost like cult behavior at this point. Put it out. And last question I have, and you've been so generous with time. In other situations where universities cracked down in ways that didn't seem to make sense. And also, we're finding with churches and synagogues, um, there was eventually emerging from the shadows a shadowy medical advisor, or someone from the Board of Health, or some like shadowy figure that was telling the university how to behave. And it seemed like had access to a lot of money to turn off or turn on depending on their compliance. So we've traced some of this to federal funding for quote unquote trusted messengers. Other funding has been the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But I guess I'm asking you, what have you seen anything behind a university like George Mason's decision making that is incentivizing them, from an external source?
Um, that is again a question that I might be able to answer in a couple of weeks. I'll say this, that's being looked into actually.
I love Jenin Younes. Jenin Younes, you've been so generous. We're going to circle back to you for sure in a couple of weeks when you're ready to unveil your latest superheroine attack on the forces of evil that menace us. You are absolutely the best. I hope that the universe just dumps wonderful things on you, because every single day you fight for the rights of the rest of us, you and your colleagues at the NCLA. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing this huge
So much,
victory.
Frank. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.